from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Sometimes it's really the simple things we do with our children that make the most difference when it comes to their long-term health and development. Today, we dive into some of those quote-unquote simple things.
That back and forth engagement that young children have with the caregivers in their lives from a young age is the thing that drives child development forward. There's no app, there's no toy, there's no video that on its own will do that. It is actually loving, nurturing responses back and forth with adults in their lives that is what makes development go forward for children.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Today, we're talking about this concept called early literacy and how and why we need to promote it and support it as parents. To do so, I have with me Dr. Dipesh Navsaria, who is a pediatrician with a degree in, get this, children's librarianship. Dipesh, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I didn't know one could get a degree in children's librarianship. So I am so excited to hear from you.
Yeah, and actually, believe it or not, I did that master's in library science in the middle of medical school. That's a whole nother story.
Oh my gosh. Sometimes I look back at the things I did early in my training and I'm like, I was so ambitious. It sounds like something like that was also happening with you. Dipesh, let's start at the beginning. What is early literacy? What do we mean when we say early literacy?
I'm so glad that we're bothering to define it because the term gets used differently. So there's some folks who think early literacy and they're thinking kindergarten through second grade. But when pediatricians talk about early literacy, we are talking birth to about age 5. So before school entry, actually.
Yeah, so important and really so early. Now, I'm going to ask you the $1 million question early, right? How do we as parents promote and support early literacy?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's important. Parents might be wondering, my 2-month-old can't read. Why are you telling me to read aloud to them or give them books or things like that? Literacy is not just about reading. It's about interacting with books. It's about being comfortable with books. It's about knowing that books and reading are a thing so that young children are eventually approaching preschool, kindergarten, wherever, with a familiarity around this thing that we call a book that you open and that hopefully they're saying, oh, this is a great thing because I get to do this with my parents and other loving adults around me. And I want them to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And we're modeling, right? Dipesh, tell us for a second, what exactly happens in the brain of a child who is read to from an early age? And we're talking about how that looks different as children get older, right? From infants to young kids. But tell us a little bit about what's happening to the brain as we're doing this.
Yeah. So people often think that we're focusing on, are they learning their letters and are they words and things like that about the building blocks of literacy? But the reality is that the reason pediatricians should be supporting early literacy from a young age is not only those things, but also what we call relational health, which is a fancy term for the health of relationships. Do you enjoy spending time with each other? Does your child feel that they're learning that you, when they say something or point at something or gesture or whatever, that their parent will respond and will maybe name the object for them when they're young or confirm when they get older, like, yes, that's an apple that you're looking at. That back and forth engagement that young children have with the caregivers in their lives from a young age is the thing that drives child development forward. There's no app, there's no toy, there's no video that on its own will do that. It is actually loving, nurturing responses back and forth with adults in their lives that is what makes development go forward for children.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about it because it really is so much more than the book itself in front of us, right? It's the interaction, it's the relationship, it's the time that we're spending together. So all of those things.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head because the book is almost like a tool. This isn't about just saying, oh, just throw books at children and go on, kid, and go look at the book yourself. It's a tool to help facilitate that back and forth interaction with families. And that's why we just don't like doing book giveaway programs, but we like doing the modeling and showing how the shared reading, the shared looking at a book together is really so critical.
Yeah. And walk us through what that looks like, Dipesh, because I think some of us intuitively think we know, but is it when you have a baby who's only a few months old, you put them on your lap and you read to them, and then that changes as they get older? What does that look like in our homes?
Yeah, so with an infant, it's, as you just said, having them up in your lap, it's having a book out, and there's all sorts of guidance about what constitutes an age-appropriate book, because your infant is probably not going to give you a whole lot of feedback about whether they care for the book or not. But we know that books with high contrast help engage them in terms of their eyesight and all. And it's really about spending that time looking together, even if it's just a few minutes. It's something that you're doing together. And then as that child grows older, it becomes something that they expect. As they're able to hold the book, as an older infant develops those fine motor skills, they're able to hold the book, maybe bat at the pages, eventually start to point at things, and you can help them name what those things are. Those are all what happen in the early years before you even get to a toddler who's able to say words.
Yeah. And I'm hearing you talk and I'm wondering, you mentioned there's all kinds of guidance about what constitutes an age-appropriate book. Mm-hmm. I have a 3-year-old at home, as our audience knows. What is that guidance, Dipesh? How do we know what an age-appropriate book is?
Mm-hmm. So some of it is the physical form of the book. And I'm going to throw a really nice little fun fact here in a moment, but we often are giving board books to young children. And most people correctly think that the board book is because kids are going to drool on it, or they might rip the pages and put it in their mouth and things like that. You need something tough. But the other thing is, when you're a baby that doesn't have those fine motor skills yet, like a pincer grasp, you actually can't turn paper pages. You need to be able to bat at board book pages to be able to even get that page turned over there. So it's actually a lovely piece of engineering. So board books, high contrast, very basic sorts of things, like colors or animals or things like that. As that child gets a little older, toddlerhood, and then, of course, preschoolers, they start to let you know what their preferences are. And that's where having a good variety of books is really helpful.
Yes. And they have their favorites, and it's often more than one, and it's often past their bedtime. That is definitely what's happening in our home.
Although I do need to tell you, when my son, who's now he's actually just graduated from college, so This is a while ago, but we used to always read Goodnight Moon as the last book in the stack before I put him down when he was a toddler. And one night he must have been feeling tired and just wanted to go to bed. And we sat down with the stack, and he reached down in the pile and he picked up Goodnight Moon and handed it to me. And it was his way. He didn't have a lot of language yet, but it was his way of saying, I'm just tired and really want to go to bed. So we read it quickly and I put him off to bed. And it was actually a lovely bit of communication because he knew the routine. And that's the other thing that reading together, particularly before bedtime, kids know routines, and it gives them the sense of permanence. Even when you're traveling or move to a new home, or for some families, right, they may not have great housing security, right? So just even amidst chaos and uncertainty, it gives you something to anchor yourselves as a family and to maintain those back and forth relationships.
Yeah, I love that because the books really do come with us as a family, no matter where we are and who we're visiting. And it's really so helpful for the routine and the knowing that it's time to wind down and go to sleep. Before we move on to the additional questions that I have for you, Dipesh, I do want to ask you, and again, really thinking about my 3-year-old, but one thing that I'm really trying to start encouraging is the comprehension part of the reading. And I'm trying to balance this with keeping it fun, right? Like, I don't want to turn it into an academic exercise. I don't want to be questioning him as we're going through the story and flipping the pages.
Standardized testing, yeah.
Right. I'm trying to keep it fun.
Sure.
But how do I encourage him to start digesting the stories, to talk about it? What are your tips there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a challenge that some families experience is that they say, wow, I've had this happen many times in checkups that I've done. They come in and I ask about shared reading and they say, my kid used to like reading, but he doesn't seem to like it anymore. So often what's happening is it's a squirmy toddler. Mm-hmm. And sometimes parents, we shouldn't assume that this is an automatic, like, of course you know this because it's automatic, right? Why would you not know this? We learn to interact with other people and we learn to share books with young children by watching others do it. So if we've not had that opportunity, how would we know what to do?
Right.
So if you're trying to read to a squirmy child, expecting that they'll sit there quietly and listen to everything you're saying and not interrupt, yeah, that doesn't work so well with a 15 or 18-month-old, right?
Yeah, no, it does not.
Yeah, their attention span is half a second, and that's normal. That is absolutely normal. So families need a little bit of help and guidance to say, hey, you don't need to read every line on the page. Let your child hold the book. Let them turn the pages. Make up stories about the picture. Look for things in the pictures. This is a back and forth technique that works really well with toddlers. And then as they become more comfortable with books and as they develop, by the time they're 3 or older, typically they're more able to listen to the whole story. That's also the age at which they start to recognize, hey, wait a minute, those little black marks on the page, what you and I call letters and words and sentences, those are actually telling you what to say. The younger child, the 2-year-old, thinks you're telling the story just by looking at the pictures. And my goodness, you're using the same words every time.
Yeah. It becomes a little bit of a discovery process. And it's, we're going through it as you're talking about it. I'm thinking about what we're going through at home and it's happening. It's fascinating. Uh-huh. He's starting to remember the words on the page. He's starting to anticipate them. Mm-hmm. He's starting to ask why. But why?
Oh,
why did the little blue truck get stuck, right? Yeah.
But when my son was 3 and my daughter was 2, I had them both up in my lap and I was reading aloud from a picture book. And my daughter was just listening away. Remember, she was 2, so she hasn't developed this thing we call print awareness yet. My son, though, he reached down, my thumb was over words on the opposite page that I wasn't reading yet, and he pushed my thumb out of the way. He was staring. He didn't know any letters yet.
Wow.
He was staring at this and going, hold on, there's something going on here. And this is actually a really important moment for children to discover, and that happens through shared reading.
Yeah, through sitting together. I love it. I love it so much. Dipesh, if you had a little child now, and congratulations to you on your children graduating from college. I always, when I meet parents who have older kids who are in college or through college, I'm always just like, congratulations.
Indeed.
If you had a child who's little right now and you're purposely trying to set them up to love books, how would you set up the environment around them? Are we talking about a bookcase that is at their eye level where they can grab books from? What would you do to make this a really inviting environment for them?
So the basics are a book, the child, and you. And the most important equation there is the child and the adult, because even if you're in a situation where you don't have a book available, right, you can make up stories. You can talk about the world around you. You can be in the grocery store and be like narrating what you see out there in the world or helping play I Spy and identify things, right? Those are all kind of reading-ish activities, so to speak, and that's all fine. If a family wishes to do more, there's other things that are nice. Yes, a bookcase in a child's room is a great idea. It kind of gives the books a sense of prominence and, they're right there at hand. A bedside lamp is great. And even after you've done shared reading together, giving your child, even if it's 3 minutes, just to look at a book on their own before lights out helps set up that kind of idea that this is what we do to wind down before lights out, rather than electronic devices or other things that might be more stimulating and things like that. But I want to emphasize that the most important thing really is the people. And a family that may not have resources does not need to feel like, oh, but I have to have all these things to do it right. And let's also remember, if obtaining new books and beautiful, developmentally appropriate books is a challenge in terms of affordability and all, public libraries have amazing books and amazing people in them who can advise you on what's new, what might your child enjoy, things like that.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you, Dipesh, is that we really don't have to make this complicated, nor do we have to feel bad if we don't have a book display that looks like our favorite influencers' book display on our social media channels.
Yes.
It's really about the simplicity of it all. And I have to tell you, we're very blessed in our home that we can afford books. My mother-in-law bought my little guy a subscription of books. So we've been very, very fortunate in that regard. And I still feel that he's missing something from not going to the public library. So I'm looking into getting him a public library membership because I think it's
Excellent.
such a fun thing to do with your little people at home.
One of my fondest memories growing up, we didn't buy many books at home and all, but it was a weekly trip to the library. And I used to come home with armfuls of books. And I don't know why I was surprised I eventually ended up in library school.
Right.
But yeah, it was a highlight. And public libraries are available virtually everywhere in the United States. They are one of our greatest civic resources. And even in rural areas, bookmobile programs and all tend to be pretty good.
Yes. So we are working to make those memories with our little guy because I do think there's something really incredible about public libraries. Dipesh, so far we've been talking about really the simplicity, but the amazing things, many, many things that you get from reading with your kids. And hopefully we have convinced or reassured people that what they're doing makes a difference and it's really important. I do want to ask you a little bit about data though, because we are big fans of data on the show when we have it. So what does the data say about the educational outcomes, meaning how kids perform in school, and those who are regularly read to versus kids who are not regularly read to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me just start off with just kind of pointing out something that I think will be evident to most listeners once I say it. If you think about a child who's been read to most days and is familiar with books, is excited by them, has developed some of that early word and letter recognition, and they start on day one of kindergarten. Let's pretend they haven't even been in preschool, just day one of kindergarten.
Yeah.
They are already starting with often most, if not all, letters of the alphabet that they know. They understand words. They understand a broader variety of words because the language we use in printed text tends to be more diverse and richer. If you think of Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, right? The wild things gnashed their terrible teeth, right? We don't use words like gnashed in everyday conversation.
Right.
But kids develop those, they've heard these more unusual or rare words and so on. Compare that to a child who has not been read to. Maybe they've been put, again, with the best of intentions in front of a very rote, here's a YouTube video on the ABCs, right? That doesn't have story and rare words and context, and most importantly, does not have that loving, caring, live adult right there with them doing that back and forth interaction. That child is going to probably start with fewer letters, is what the data shows, a less familiarity with books and narrative, and, having spent more time on digital media, which can kind of contribute to shorter attention spans and things of that nature. We do know that programs that support families and build their skills in reading together with families, like the Reach Out and Read program that helps train clinicians in how to support families doing all of this, we have tons of data showing that it does make a difference in terms of language scores and so on. It's not going to solve everything on its own, but it's such a cheap, easy intervention with so many benefits that the data does show that it makes a difference.
Yeah. And I really just love it when the data backs what we intuitively know and understand, right? The thing is then, how do we support families to do these things that we know will make a difference for their kids? Dipesh, we close out our show every episode with what we like to call the parenting prescription. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to promoting early literacy, what is one thing that you would recommend to all parents listening today?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I didn't know you were going to ask that. But right here on my desk, I have something I do hand out in clinic, which is literally a prescription for reading. And I know that since this is an audio medium, people can't see it, but
it's a prescription, guys.
It is
on
a
prescription
little
pad.
Yep, it is a little prescription that says prescription for reading and name and date and all that. And the number one thing on the top says share books together. That's the prescription. And then there's little check boxes saying every night at bedtime for blank minutes every day, and that number changes based on age, and as needed with refills as requested at the local public library. And then I sign my name at the bottom. And I'll tell you a brief little story. The first version I did of this, I got it a little wrong. It actually used to say RX read books. And then I said, wait a minute, this isn't just about reading. It's about sharing books together. And I changed it to about 8 years ago to emphasize that part, because it's that relationship that matters more than anything. So it's that daily reading is that number one thing. That's what I would write on the prescription because I've already done it.
I love that so much, and I might start doing that with my own families, my own patients in my clinic. Thank you so much, Dr. Dipesh Navsaria. This was such a treat for joining us today.
Thank you. And I'll just say, if folks would like to hear similar conversations on this, we do have our own podcast, the Reach Out and Read podcast at reachoutandread, all one word, .org/podcast.
There you go. Now you know where to find Dr. Dipesh Navsaria, who's a pediatrician and a librarian. Thank you so much at home for joining us today. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and YouTube at Healthy Children AAP, and be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Laura Alessio,
Catherine Beard,
Garrett Brown,
Zach Christman,
Ann Johnsos, Kathy Jewell,
Doug Nagel,
Jackie Ortega,
Susan Stevens Martin,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho Sanchez. Thanks for listening.